Welcome to a very special edition of Meet the Press Now, live from Chicago. I am Kristen Welker here in the United Center as we count down to the start of the fourth and final night of the Democratic National Convention and what will be an historic evening. Tonight, Vice President Harris will formally accept her party's nomination for president. Just 1 month since becoming a candidate, and with just 75 days until the election. It will be the biggest speech of her political career and a deeply personal one, as she becomes just the second woman and first woman of color to top a major party's presidential ticket. Sources tell us that while the vice president will acknowledge the history of the moment, her speech will focus on her qualifications to be president and her optimistic agenda. It comes after her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, introduced himself to voters last night, emphasizing his journey to the nomination as a coach, a veteran, a teacher, and a dad. He and other speakers like Oprah Winfrey leaned heavily into the Harris campaign's message of freedom.
I'm letting you in on how we started a family, because this is a big part about what this election is about. Freedom. When Republicans use the word freedom, they mean that the government should be free to invade your doctor's office. Corporations free to pollute your air and water. And banks free to take advantage of customers. But when we Democrats talk about freedom, we mean the freedom to make a better life for yourself and the people that you love. Freedom to make your own health care decisions. And yeah, your kids' freedom to go to school without worrying about being shot dead in the hall.
The work is not done. The work will never be done because freedom isn't free. America is an ongoing project. It requires commitment. It requires being open to the hard work and the heart work of democracy. And every now and then, it requires standing up to life's bullies.
And in perhaps the most moving moment of the evening, Walz sharing a moment with his son and daughter in the crowd as he talked about his and his wife's struggles with infertility. You can see his son there saying, "That's my dad." Walz also building on the calls for unity we've heard throughout the week as the Harris campaign looks to broaden its coalition and maintain momentum amid a barrage of attacks from the Trump campaign.
This is the part, clip and save it and send it to your undecided relatives so they know. If you're a middle-class family or a family trying to get into the middle class, Kamala Harris is going to cut your taxes. If you're getting squeezed by prescription drug prices, Kamala Harris is going to take on Big Pharma. If you're hoping to buy a home, Kamala Harris is going to help make it more affordable. And no matter who you are, Kamala Harris is going to stand up and fight for your freedom to live the life that you want to lead. Because that's what we want for ourselves, and it's what we want for our neighbors.
Joining me now from the convention floor is NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. Yamiche, Pink is on stage right now, and I think she's going to start a sound check. In fact, there she is. Yamiche, I'm going to go to you in a second, but let's just listen to Pink for 1 minute.
I'm way louder than Justin. Beautiful hearts. Yeah, still need a little bit of your
And Yamiche, as we are listening to Pink conduct her sound test here, I'm going to come back to you. Everyone here treated to a little mini concert. They're now cheering for her behind you. Wondering if there are going to be more surprises tonight, but let's talk about the main event. Let's talk about Vice President Kamala Harris's speech tonight. I know you've been working your sources to get a preview. What are you anticipating we'll hear from the Vice President?
Well, Kristen, I can just tell you that there is energy and enthusiasm on the floor. As you said, Pink rehearsing here, but a lot of people, of course, waiting for the even bigger moment in political speak here, which would be when Vice President Kamala Harris is going to take the stage at the same place where Pink is rehearsing to talk about her vision for America. And I've been talking to a lot of sources who say she is meticulously preparing for this speech. She spent weeks going to Howard for debate prep, but also for speech prep. She's going through every column, every comma, every word, I was told. And she really has three big things she wants to do. The first is she wants to really reintroduce herself and maybe even introduce herself to some Americans, talking about her professional background as a prosecutor, the cases she took on, but also her personal background as a daughter from a middle-class family, specifically talking about her mother who told her, you might be the first, but make sure you're not the last. She's also going to be talking about contrasting her vision for America with the vision of former President Donald Trump, saying he's wrong for America. And she's going to be saying her vision is rooted in patriotism, talking about the fact that she wants to be a president for all Americans. Now, as you said, she's going to be leaning into the moment of the fact that she will be the first black woman, the first South Asian woman, the first woman of color to be on a major party ticket. But her team is very cautious about race and gender. They want to make sure that people understand that she is qualified. So she's going to be talking about her accomplishments, her background, and of course, she's going to be praising President Biden, which I know we can talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, talk about how much we will hear her reference President Biden, the Biden agenda. And will she be clear with folks tonight about how a Harris administration would look different than a Biden administration?
Well, I was told by a source who's very familiar with the speech preparations that the early part of the speech is going to really be dedicated to praising President Biden. She feels a great loyalty to him. She feels a great gratitude to him, of course, because she made her his vice president, but also, of course, he stepped aside just a month ago and made her, of course, endorsing her as the top of the ticket. So she really is going to say that she loves Joe Biden, that his legacy will live on in her administration. But she's going to be talking a bit about policy and the ways that she feels like she can build on what Joe Biden and her accomplished through their administration, Kristen.
All right, Yamiche Alcindor, thank you for sharing all of your great reporting with us. We appreciate it. Joining me now is a co-chair for the Harris-Wells campaign and Delaware Democratic Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester. She is also running for Senate. Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for joining us.
Thank you for having me on this exciting night.
Well, and Pink is getting things started, so we'll have to have our conversation over the sounds of Pink emanating through the air. But let's just start right there where I left off with Yamiche. What are you expecting to hear from Vice President Harris tonight? What does she need to do to make this night be successful?
Well, first of all, I have to just say how proud I am. I was really fortunate, and I want to pick up as well to talk about Joe Biden and how I remember when he had to make that very first decision about who was going to be his vice presidential pick, and he asked me to be one of the 4 people on the VP selection committee. And so I came into Congress with Kamala Harris in 2016. She came into the Senate and I in the House, and we've had that relationship. But then to see her become our vice president because of her qualifications. And so I think that will be one of the major things that has been talked about this week, but also that she will share. I think you will also hear about her vision for the future of this country. And I love the opportunity agenda, the opportunity economy, because for her, it's not just about people, getting by, it's about getting ahead. And so I think tonight you're going to hear about that. You're also going to hear joy. I mean, I think that has been a signature of this whole convention. My speech was about Bright Hope, the church my grandmother attended for 70 years. And lastly, freedom. And like Tim Walz, who I had the opportunity to serve with, I'm got the best title of my life last year, which is grandmother, and it is because of IVF. So we're going to fight for reproductive freedom as well as our democracy.
Well, congratulations on becoming a grandmother.
Thank you. The best thing ever.
My parents would agree with you, by the way. You know, it's interesting because Hillary Clinton leaned heavily, you could say, into the fact that she was a history-making candidate. We saw that in 2016. She referenced that when she spoke here at the start of this week. But Vice President Harris so far has taken a very different tact. As Yamiche said, she may reference the fact and she will acknowledge the fact that, yes, she is the first, but as her mother said to her, you don't want to be the last.
Yes.
Do you think she should lean more heavily into the fact that she's a history-making nominee?
You know, I think that there's debate about that, but there really shouldn't be. She is all of it, you know. But the most important thing, and I know this, having been the first in Delaware to be elected to Congress and hopefully the Senate, that your real goal is to make an impact. That's the goal. The thing about being the first is that it helps to inspire others. For me, when I ran, I had never run for anything in my life. I had just been widowed. You know, I was over 50. And so the first sometimes helps encourage other people and inspire other people and kick down the door. But why she's doing this is for the American people, because she truly wants to see all boats lifted. I love this song.
Well, it's playing at the right time then. Well, on that point,
yes.
I mean, the Trump campaign has been counter-programming this entire week. Donald Trump at the border today. And he's, of course, been criticizing the Biden administration for its immigration policies, for inflation, for crime. Do you think she should get specific on some of these issues to answer what have become some of voters' concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think throughout the whole convention, there have been examples and videos and stories about her actual experience and expertise, but also her vision. And so I think you saw that Donald Trump actually killed the deal. That was a bipartisan deal on immigration, which is important to us. And so I think you'll hear some of that tonight. I think you'll hear some of the specifics that she has accomplished, but also what's the vision.
She does, and she's talked about that bipartisan deal that you referenced and saying if she were to be elected, she would try to sign it into law. But does she need to get specific about what more she might do on the issue of immigration?
I think you will hear more tonight.
Okay.
I'm not going to preempt anything. That's not my job to do that. But what I can say is she has the vision. She's got the specifics. There are things that we've already done in a bipartisan way and sometimes on our own. But what she has tonight, you're going to see full on that stage that's going to be leading us to the future instead of going backwards.
Will there be differences with the Biden agenda, or will it look like she's building on the Biden agenda?
I mean, I think there are some things that we started together, which is capping the cost of insulin for seniors. Well, we believe that $35 cap should be for everyone. You will see a focus on affordable housing, which we hear is one of the big issues for Americans, and also lowering the day-to-day costs for everyone. And again, back to that focus on freedom and the future. I think those are the themes: freedom, the future, and joy. We need a little bit more joy again.
For all of the unity that has been on display inside this convention hall, there obviously have been some protesters, and we just learned that the DNC rejected a bid by a Palestinian American to speak on stage. The UAW, of course, a key part of the Democratic coalition, issued a statement that reads in part, "If we want the war in Gaza to end, we can't put our heads in the sand or ignore the voices of the Palestinian Americans in the Democratic Party. If we want peace, if we want real democracy, and if we want to win this election, the Democratic Party must allow a Palestinian American speaker to be heard from the DNC stage tonight." What is your response to that?
You know, my response is that as a country, you know, freedom of expression is so important. And as you can see from the diversity of the people in this room, we come from different backgrounds, different opinions, and so we celebrate that. But we also, as Democrats, President Biden and his administration, Vice President Harris, have worked tirelessly to bring peace to that region. So one of the things that I would say is that we are all unified in our desire to have an end to this conflict, to have peace in the Middle East. And so tonight, I don't know if that will be referenced by the Vice President because I haven't seen her speech, but I do know we have that bond in common.
All right, Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it.
And I hope maybe we'll hear a preview of Beyonce. I don't know. That would be lovely.
We're trying to report it out. There have been all of these
there's a lot of rumors
that there could be a surprise.
There's a lot of rumors.
So far, everyone's saying no more surprises.
Well, I'm a member of the Beehive, so if they need me up there, I'm happy to help. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Congresswoman. Appreciate it. Joining me now is NBC's Washington Managing Editor Carol Lee and NBC's Chief Political Analyst Chuck Todd. Guys, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Feeding the Beyonce rumors.
I know.
And she's the campaign chair. That's a good enough story.
I know.
We can go to standards, right?
Is she
like,
coming?
let's go to
is
this.
she coming?
So says the campaign co-chair of the Harris campaign. We're not saying.
Believe you me, if I knew, I'd be dressed a little differently. So, just
ready to dance. Okay, Congresswoman, thank you so much. Carol and I have been trying to report this rumor out. Carol, let's start right there just so we give folks a reality check. There are all these rumors that there's going to be a big surprise. Maybe Beyonce's going to come. We're being told so far that's not the case. No more big surprises. But obviously the Democrats are trying to use their celebrity high wattage power to get the energy going here.
Yeah, we saw that with Oprah last night. And yes, and so even though people are saying it's not going to happen, it hasn't stopped the fun of everyone still talking about it here. It's literally what everyone is talking about.
But I actually wouldn't do it.
Because
there's one star tonight. There's one star tonight.
That's
Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Wednesday night it might have made sense, or tomorrow it could make sense. You actually don't step on the nominee.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about the nominee and the substance of what we might hear from her. Chuck, kick this part of our conversation off. What do you think she needs to do? And there's this big question about how much detail she's going to get into. Typically, we might not spend that much time talking about detail if she hadn't just joined the top of the ticket.
Right.
But people are really hungry for answers from her. Do you think they'll get them tonight?
I think she needs to directionally say who she is without getting specific. Convention speeches or not. Mario Cuomo had a famous line. You know, you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose.
Yeah.
And that is always good advice. You don't want to make it if she comes in with the Joe Biden speech on Monday night, huge mistake.
Yeah.
Right? Joe Biden basically sounds like his acceptance speech, because it's my understanding they sort of used a bit of that. It was very laundry listy.
Yeah.
Now, he was running for a re-election, and a re-election is slightly different. Even Barack Obama's acceptance in 2012 was a little more of the detail. But Tim Walz last night never once talked about his time in Congress other than winning contests, shooting contests against Republicans. And he didn't talk about, he didn't really talk about what he did as governor. It was more of a value speech, right? I'm on your side. And when I think about the successful, when Democrats have had good conventions, it's when the nominee has done less substance and more values. Yeah. Bill Clinton did it really well in '92. Al Gore, people forget this. I mean, his campaign was languishing until his convention, and he really sort of created a very populist speech, but it was a values. Whose side are you on? And I think that little things like talking about her days as a prosecutor is a way to saying, look, I'm not going to be soft on crime. I'm not going to, I know they're trying to paint me as a picture here. I don't think she'll do this, but I actually would confront. They're going to say I'm this.
Yeah.
Let me tell you the truth. They're going to say I'm this. Let me tell you this. I don't think she'll do that because I don't think she wants to sort of feed those. But in some ways, the speech ought to feel like it gives these delegates the responses they need when Trump says she's soft on crime, she's ruined San Francisco, the border's a mess. One thing I'd love to see them do, and they don't do, is acknowledge we didn't get the border right for the first 2 years. But we're getting it right now.
Right.
And I'm not going to mess this policy up. It's, to me, it's a way to to lean into the middle to say, hey, we don't always get it right, but we listen to you.
And we learned our lesson.
Right.
Yeah. Carol, part of Chuck's talking about the narrative, the fact that she has this burden of reintroducing herself really to the American people. One of the things that she's not leaning into, unlike Hillary Clinton, is the fact that, yes, she is the first woman of color to be at the top of a major party ticket. Now, again, she's going to nod to that. She'll acknowledge it. But talk a little bit about the strategy behind that. It's very different from what we saw in Hillary Clinton in 2016. It is
very different, and it's partly because of 2016, because Hillary Clinton did it, and it's not as much of a novelty, but it's also partly because of the calendar, because she has a very limited amount of time to introduce herself to voters, and they can see that she's a woman. They can see that she's a woman of color. Those are two things that they already know about her. They don't know how she grew up, what her background is, how she came to be, what she did as a lawyer, what she did as a prosecutor, her resume, and those are the things, and what she would do for them, and how she may or may not be different than President Biden if she were to win the White House. And so she's got this challenge of really trying to tell a story about herself and who she is, and at the same time, what she's going to do for the country. And so saying, dwelling on the fact that she's a historical candidate is something that others can do more than she needs to do.
Well, and it's so interesting, Chuck, because, Carol referenced Oprah Winfrey was here. It wasn't just about Oprah Winfrey being here. Right. It was about her talking about the fact that she's an independent. You talked about Tim Walz. He said, I'm a proud gun owner. Right. I support the Second Amendment, and yet I care about keeping kids safe. There's a real attempt to expand the tent.
Well, this is sort of the Obama wing of the party. For whatever reason, Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign constantly let people know which voters she didn't want supporting.
Deplorable.
And it was a terrible way to message. And she would constantly talk about, I want women for me. I want, LGBT for me. She never once asked for the vote of just sort of generic white guy, generic men in general. And it was sort of notable. You're like, well, why don't you want them included here? You could actually take Joe Klein in his Substack made this comparison. I thought it was fascinating. Hillary Clinton's speech here was she wrapped herself in Kamala Harris's history.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's where her head is at. Barack Obama didn't do that. What did Barack Obama do? He went and said, let me tell you about my black mother-in-law and my white grandmother who didn't know each other. In some ways they grew up differently, and in some ways they grew up the same. And let me tell you how similar they are.
Yeah.
That is not just subtext, right? That is saying, look, I know we may look different, but we actually share a lot of values. We may pray to different gods, but we share a bunch of these values. And I don't expect, she hasn't been doing it. Yeah. She doesn't. Again, I go back, she doesn't need to. Others can do it.
Right.
Others can talk about the history. Her job is to do a good job so that she's not the only one in history.
Yeah, and go ahead.
I was just going to add that she also wants to make sure that voters understand that she earned this, that she is standing on that stage because she put in the work and she did all of her background and her history has led up to this moment. It's not for any other reason. It's not because of her gender. It's not because of her race.
Well, Carol, as a part of the sort of similarities between the way that Harris and Obama, for example, have campaigned, the positivity that we are hearing in all of these speakers, the hope, the joy, it's almost like they're trying to repurpose the hope and change message from 2008, an acknowledgement that Biden's message, warning of the threat that Trump posed, just wasn't resonating.
It was also dark. It was this ominous figure is going to come in and take all these things from you. And this is kind of like, there's two things happening. One, it's, trying to diminish him in the sense of like, that's sort of crazy. And, here's this guy with all these views and trying to make him smaller. And then at the same time, also really just talk about how she has a positive agenda going forward.
All right, guys. Thank you. Fourth and final night. We'll all be watching and staying up late. Carol and Chuck, great conversation. Coming up, dissent at the DNC. Moments ago, the Uncommitted movement says they're still hoping the Harris campaign may grant their request to have a Palestinian American speak at the convention. Is that realistic? We'll see. And as we look ahead to Harris's historic acceptance speech tonight, we're also looking back on other barrier-breaking moments in DNC history, like this one in 2016 when former Secretary of State and former First Lady Hillary Clinton became the first woman ever to accept a major party's presidential nomination.
Standing here as my mother's daughter and my daughter's mother, I'm so happy this day has come. I'm happy for grandmothers and little girls and everyone in between. I'm happy for boys and men, because when any barrier falls in America, it clears the way for everyone. After all, when there are no ceilings, the sky's the limit.
Welcome back inside the convention hall. It has been a week of rousing speeches showcasing Democratic unity. But outside the venue, party divisions are on display, with pro-Palestinian protesters holding marches every day this week. And last night, members of the Uncommitted movement held a sit-in after being denied speaking time on stage. Now, just moments ago, the Uncommitted movement leaders spoke to reporters and said they're still hopeful they will get a speaker on stage tonight. Joining me now is NBC News senior political reporter Alex Seitz-Wald. Alex, always great to see you. So what's the very latest here? What did we just hear from the Uncommitted movement?
Yeah, Kristen, so they have set a 6 p.m. deadline, that's just about 2.5 hours from now, to hear something from the Harris campaign and DNC organizers about getting a speaking slot. That's been their request this entire week. They were denied that last night, but the negotiations have been ongoing, and they haven't said what they will do if that deadline is not met. The convention has been marked by really stunning unity from all parts of the Democratic Party and the coalition so far. So on this final night, when Vice President Harris is going to speak, there is a bit of a threat in the air that these 30 uncommitted delegates inside the convention hall with, full delegate credentials could stage some kind of demonstration and put a little bit of an asterisk or mar this otherwise fairly flawless convention so far.
And just talk about the protests overall, Alex. There have been some arrests this week, but they have been largely peaceful, right?
Yeah, that's right. The protests, I think, have not been as bad as initially expected. On that first day, they breached a barrier, which concerned a lot of people. But since then, things have calmed down. And inside the hall, there have been a handful of very small, short disruptions, but nothing like the big fears that people had coming in. But it's still this striking tonal difference with these uncommitted delegates and their supporters. The mood is so festive and upbeat, and they are literally talking about dead children and their relatives suffering in Palestinian territories, and they acknowledge that this is no fun. They acknowledge, one said to me, feels like he's the sad clown in the corner of a party. They say they want to celebrate. These delegates are all Democrats. A lot of them have held public office or worked in public office. They say they want to support Kamala Harris, and they just want this kind of token symbolic gesture so that they feel they can go back to their supporters, their constituents, and say this party is listening to us and wants us in the tent.
All right. Well, we know you will track what happens very closely. Bring us any updates as you get them. Alex Seitz-Wald, thank you so much. Let me now bring in our panel. Stephanie Shriak, former president of Emily's List. Cornell Belcher, Democratic strategist and an NBC News political analyst. And Garrett Ventry, Republican strategist and founder of GRV Strategies. Thanks to all of you for being here. Garrett, I'm going to get to you in 1 second. We're going to start at the table. Cornell, pick up where Alex just left off. How do you think the campaign, the DNC, is handling this situation, this request to hear from a pro-Palestinian American? Was it the right thing to do to deny them the request to speak?
Well, I can't speak on that because I don't know the conversation.
Yeah.
What I will say is that, look, I think their voices have been heard. I think some speakers have talked about it. We have a ticket that is committed to a two-state solution, that's committed to a ceasefire. But look, it's a Democratic convention. I've been to a lot of these. I've never been to one where there wasn't a protest. But our hearts go out, and this administration is working very hard to bring a solution. And again, I hate to do this, but what's the alternative, right? The alternative is sit home and help Donald Trump, who we know is going to be a blank check for Netanyahu.
So let's talk big picture about what we anticipate we're going to hear tonight. Stephanie, the biggest speech of Vice President Harris's political life, the biggest political test, what does she need to do to come out successful?
Well, it's such a reminder that, vice presidents are known by name, but not very well known typically. So everybody knows that Kamala Harris is the vice president. Now they're going to find out who the nominee is tonight. And you've heard just speech after speech of incredible stories about her. Now it's her moment to look at the entire country and talk about how we need to fight for our freedoms, and where that she is going to be doing this with and together. We need everybody's hands in, and it is, you're right, a huge moment for her. I have no doubts that she is ready for this moment.
Cornell, do you think, I know she'll give her vision. This is my vision if I were to be elected. She will obviously touch on policy. She's not going to give us a whole lot of policy details likely. But does she need to say, this is how I would be different from President Biden?
I think this entire convention has been laying out two very dramatically different visions about America. And one is dark, one is Gotham City, and one is, America's still a city on the hill. And I think the joy thing that Republicans make fun of, they can make fun of it all you want, but the joy is real. And after sort of the darkness and the chaos, Americans are just looking to be happy. Americans want to be optimistic. And once upon a time, that wasn't a Democratic thing, because I remember that was Ronald Reagan's thing as well. Americans want to feel good about America, and they want to lean into the optimism. And I think that she's going to give them that today. I think this ticket is giving them that.
And as I go out to Garrett, I want to take a look at what's happening on this stage here behind us, guys. Maya Harris, the sister of Vice President Kamala Harris, is on the stage right now, checking things out ahead of tonight. She is one of Vice President Harris's closest advisors. Garrett, when I was at the Republican National Convention, Republicans were hugely unified around former President Donald Trump. It was clear the Republican Party is his party. And the question we all had is, boy, will Democrats be able to match the energy and enthusiasm here? Based on what we're seeing and hearing inside the convention hall, it appears as though they have met that bar. What are Republicans saying as they watch all of this unfold? Is there some trepidation that Democrats are more united than they could have anticipated just a month ago?
Yeah, Kristen, they're clearly more united than they were a few months ago when President Biden was still in the race, right? You saw this across with polls in swing states, polls nationally. And Democrats clearly do have energy now because they feel like they have a candidate who simply isn't in mental decline. The big question for Vice President Harris is, how does she define herself apart from the Biden administration when she's part of the Biden administration? You're talking about the two big issues for voters right now, the economy and inflation, and the border. Former President Trump has a large lead on both of those issues. You're seeing him do that in Arizona now. So I think he's going to lean in. This is going to be a race for her to try and define herself apart from that and Biden's failures on a lot of these issues and try and tell her own story, while at the same time, Republicans try and tie her to a lot of the policies that voters just across the country do not like. But they're clearly more unified than they were a month ago. I think Republicans are equally unified. And the next really 80 days here, 75 days, it's going to come down to tens of thousands of votes in swing states. I think the debates are going to matter. And who knows what can happen between now and the election. But I think if President Trump does focus on the border, he focuses on the economy, he focuses on inflation, the key issues that really drive his agenda, that is a strong contrast that should propel him to victory in November.
Garrett, just to follow up with you quickly, what do you make of this counter-programming campaign that we've seen by former President Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance? Do you think it's been effective so far? Do you think they're breaking through?
Yeah, I mean, clearly we're talking about it right now, and it's been, covered pretty extensively here, obviously, to try and contrast what Democrats are doing. Now, Democrats, there is a lot of energy, there's a lot of buzz, there's vibes, but buzz and vibes don't solve inflation. Buzz and vibes don't solve the border crisis. And so what you're seeing is Vice President Harris has not done one press conference. She's not done one interview in 30 days. And let's also remember here, she's received actually 0 votes from voters right now. And so she has a lot to prove on the stage tonight. And we will see what happens in her speech tonight and going forward in the debate and coming into the election.
Cornell, what about that? How quickly does she need to start making herself available to do interviews? Obviously, she's preparing for the debate.
Listen, I'm not going to be on the press because I'm part of the press now. But the truth of the matter is, the regular voters actually don't care that much about her not getting her interviews. All this time, we've seen her poll numbers rising. She's taking a conversation directly to the people across these states and the battleground states. She's going to do more press because she has to. But right now, it's really, really important for her to be talking less to us and talking directly to those voters in those battleground states, and that's what she's doing.
Stephanie, do you agree with that? And do you think she's going to get a post-convention bounce, or has she already had her post-convention bounce?
Oh, no, we are bouncing really high.
You think so?
I
okay.
really
All
do.
Right.
Because the truth of the matter is the entire country and everywhere you go, there is a true feelings change. And maybe folks don't think that's how it works. That is absolutely how this works. The way you win races is to be the campaign that folks want to be part of, where it feels good, where there's optimism, where there's hope, where she is going to talk with the people and about the people, and unlike Trump, not about herself. He talks about himself. The country wants to hear from a leader who is going to be with them and really understands what's going on, and that's Kamala Harris.
Cornell, where are you on this?
For one quick second, because I was going to say, listen, I hear Republicans say, well, let's talk about the issues. You've been doing this a while. You've actually done debate. It's not like Donald Trump's a policy guy. It's not like an issue guy. And what I would argue is that be careful what you ask for, because I don't think a policy conversation is going to be the antiseptic for their falling poll numbers, because when you look at the policies, when you look at reproductive rights, when you look at college affordability, there's so many issues that line up with her. One quick note on the economy. Listen, I was around for Obama, and do you think Obama had an advantage on the economy over Mitt Romney? He absolutely did not. What we did have an advantage on was who's going to fight for the middle class and working people. And that's where she's got to lean in.
Garrett, respond to what Cornell is saying, because he makes the case that, look, Trump doesn't necessarily go from campaign event to campaign event rolling out his policy papers. He's weaving a narrative, right?
But I would push back on that pretty heavily. He's put out, whether it's Agenda 47, he talks about the border conflict, he talks about the economy, he talks about new policies. We've not seen any policy there. And I'd say this campaign that Harris is running is very reminiscent of another campaign that talked about optimism and had celebrities, and her name was Hillary Clinton, and we saw that turn out in 2016. When you don't talk about policies and you rely on celebrities in Hollywood to tell middle-class people in Ohio and Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania who to vote for, they don't like that. And if we want to get to talk about the policy, the two major issues in every poll over the last 2 years, whether it's NBC, Wall Street Journal, Fox, CNN, you can name it, it is the economy, it is the border, and Democrats are massively underwater. President Trump has a lead on those two issues.
Stephanie, final point.
When we've been closing that gap since Kamala Harris has gotten the nomination on all of those issues. And I gotta say, that's the first I've ever heard anybody say that Hillary Clinton didn't have a list of policies.
Garrett,
she's not known for that.
Garrett, you acknowledge she did have pretty extensive details. That was one of the criticisms.
That's not the point that I made. The point I made was not on the policy. She clearly talked about policies more than this. I'm saying it was heavily reliant on social media influencers, Hollywood, and that didn't resonate with voters.
So true.
All right, guys, thank you. Great conversation. Really appreciate it. Garrett, thank you. Stephanie and Cornell, great conversation. Thanks. Up next, Trump hits the southern border, as we were just discussing, and hits Harris on the issue of immigration. We're live in Arizona, where the former president just wrapped up a campaign event. But first, we want to show you another historic moment at the DNC, when 40 years ago, then Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro officially became the first woman vice vice presidential nominee.
By choosing a woman to run for our nation's second highest office, you send a powerful signal to all Americans. There are no doors we cannot unlock. We will place no limits on achievement. If we can do this, we can do anything.
Welcome back. All week long, former President Trump has been holding events in swing states as part of an effort to counter-program the DNC. Today, Mr. Trump is at the southern border in Arizona as he looks to paint Vice President Harris as weak on border security and crime ahead of her prime-time address tonight. NBC's Dasha Burns joins me now from the southern border. So, Dasha, what have we heard from the former president today?
Well, Chris, this week on the campaign trail has not been typical for Trump. It hasn't been like those big, massive rallies that you're used to. It's been smaller events that are very focused on issues with specific backdrops for those issues, whether it was a manufacturing plant, a police station, or now the southern border. And here he took the opportunity to hammer Harris, the vice president, on the issues that they have been hammering her on from the beginning. They really believe immigration is one of the best issues for Trump to go after Harris, especially as he tries to tie Harris as directly as he can to President Biden, to his administration's immigration policies, the immigration issues that have unfolded under the Biden White House, tying Harris to that, calling her the border czar, standing here at the border wall and saying that she's responsible for the fact that it hasn't been built as it was, as Trump wanted it to be. And today he brought some people to this press conference, some people with personal stories of crimes that have been committed by undocumented immigrants. This is the kind of stuff that he's trying to lean into here, Kristen.
You know, it's interesting. Of course, we have heard from Vice President Kamala Harris that if she were to be elected, she would try to sign into law that border bill that Trump torpedoed. But let me ask you about one of the developments that we've been reporting on today, that in the month of July, Texas Governor Abbott did not send any buses, 0 buses to blue cities. Do you think that this is still going to be a strong issue for Republicans?
Well, it's a great question, Chris. And I actually asked former President Trump, I had a moment to ask him a quick question, and I asked him about the mass deportation operation that he wants to implement as president. He was calling it the biggest deportation operation in U.S. history. And I asked him how he would go about that in blue states. You know, here in Cochise County, everyone's very supportive of his policies, but in a lot of parts of this country, that's not the case. He believes that because Democratic states, places like New York, like Chicago, like Los Angeles, now have the immigration issue on their doorstep as they have migrants that have been housed in facilities in those cities, that he believes it's a much more prevalent issue for Democrats. And, you know, some polling does show there is some evidence to that. The question, though, is will the energy around this issue be as prevalent, as strong, if you're not seeing that as tangibly in some of these places? He seems to think that it will, but that's one thing we'll be watching play out over the coming months, Kristen.
Yeah, a lot of questions about his mass deportation proposal. Thanks for getting some of those questions to him. Dasha Burns, great job as always. Coming up after the break, we are 75 days out from the election, and former President Trump is already questioning the integrity of the vote. Congressman Jamie Raskin, a former January 6th House Committee member and former impeachment manager, is going to join me next. But first, another landmark moment from the archives. In 1976, then Congresswoman Barbara Jordan became the first black person and the first woman ever to deliver a keynote address at a convention.
I, Barbara Jordan, am a keynote speaker. That notwithstanding the past, that my presence here is one additional bit of evidence that the American dream need not forever be deferred.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Meet the Press Now, live from the fourth day of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Joining me now is Maryland Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin. He spoke from the main stage at the DNC earlier this week. Congressman Raskin, thank you so much for being here.
You've had, I'm delighted.
Well, big night. What do you expect to hear? What do you want to hear from Vice President Harris tonight?
Well, our party is the party that believes that government should be an instrument of the public good for everybody, as opposed to government being the instrument for private self-enrichment of the guy who gets in, which is obviously the Trump vision. So I'm hoping to hear from Kamala Harris what are going to be the top priorities for the administration moving into this period. Are we going to be talking about universal pre-K? What are we doing in terms of health care? What are we working on to address the needs of the people?
So you want to hear details. You want specifics.
I would like some policy specifics, but of course, the critical thing is for her to elucidate the values and the principles of the party, and I know she'll do that beautifully. But I would like, again, as a member of Congress, to see, well, what are they thinking about in terms of the policy thrust going forward?
You know, there's a big question about whether she will enumerate the ways in which she will build on the Biden agenda and which ways she will maybe be different from President Joe Biden. Do you think that's going to be important as well, to make clear that there will be some differences?
I don't think that's tough for her. I mean, the Biden-Harris administration has been one where the president and vice president have worked together super closely on a whole range of issues. So there clearly will be continuity, but there's no doubt with Kamala in charge as the chief executive, she will be the one deciding what are the new policy features that are going to be part of the administration.
Are you clear on what those are right now, the ways in which she might govern differently?
I'm not. Everything has happened so quickly, and that's why I'm saying I'm hoping to hear about it. But look, this week has been, in addition to an experiment in sleep deprivation for everybody, it's also been a great synthesis of the values of this party from the past, the great civilizing movements of our time, the women's movement and the labor movement, the environmental movement, and the principles that unify us in terms of equal rights for all and freedom to make your own decisions. So all of that will be part of what we're going to hear, but also I think then we need to hear what are we going to be fighting for in terms of policy to build on the successes of Biden-Harris.
Let me ask you, because J.D. Vance responded to some of the comments that you made here when you addressed the convention. You said that the job of VP was only available because Trump supporters, quote, tried to kill Mike Pence on January 6th. Here's how J.D. Vance responded last night.
I can't help but laugh at what Jamie Raskin said. These are people who somehow always make themselves the victims. I just don't understand a person in American politics in 2024 who's whining about what happened to them instead of using their leadership and using their influence to make the lives of American citizens better.
How do you respond to that response?
Well, of course, he was addressing Donald Trump directly, who is the professional whiner of American politics. Every day, all we hear from his boss is how poorly he's being treated by the media and how everybody is dissing him. And so I view that as just an expression of J.D. Vance's frustration about the situation he's in. Everybody knows that they are the party of whiners and losers at this point. But I was pointing out that the reason there was a vacancy on the ticket is because Donald Trump, who otherwise used to praise Mike Pence as a key sycophant in his administration, turned on him when he refused to follow Donald Trump's orders to step outside of his constitutional role and simply declare Donald Trump the winner. That's what he wanted. And when he didn't do that, Trump unleashed the mob on him, and these people set up a noose and a gallows outside, and they chanted, "Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence," and they wounded 140 police officers. This was no joke. And so if that's J.D. Vance's answer to it, it's pretty pathetic. And in fact, I heard he was attacking me, and I researched this morning to determine he had actually said before, and I'm going to elaborate on this, that he would have done what Mike Pence refused to do. He would have gone along with Donald Trump's orders.
Yeah.
which would have created a much greater crisis.
Yeah, that was during an interview several months ago. I want to ask you about the overall tone, because there has been, it seems like, an attempt to some extent, not focus as much on trying to paint Trump as a threat, more trying to say he's weird, and to lean into this idea of joy and hope. There was a moment earlier this week, though, when chants of lock him up broke out while Hillary Clinton was speaking. What did you make of that? And is it discordant, do you think, with the tone that the Democratic Party should be setting?
No, there is a great tone of happiness and joy in the resurgent fortunes of the Democrats. And we are going to continue to bring out the best in America, the incredible, breathtaking diversity of our country. We're going to do that, and we're going to be fighting for every person who lives in our country. But we're not taking any nonsense from these people anymore. The post-Trump Democratic Party is a very different party than the pre-Trump Democratic Party, because we lived through January 6th. We saw these people are capable of fraud, coercion, and violence in order to attack our constitutional order. This is not your grandfather's Republican Party.
Well, let me ask you about some comments that Donald Trump made on the campaign trail yesterday. He said, quote, "Our primary focus is not to get out the vote. It is to make sure they don't cheat." When you hear those words within the context of what you're saying, what do you make of them?
Well, he's the only politician in American history who's taken that position. Everybody else has set about a campaign saying, how are we going to expand our coalition? How are we going to bring in new voters? How do we create a platform that will appeal to the vast majority of the people? That's what the Democrats are doing. We're the party of democracy, and we're the party of the people. Meantime, he's already flagging that he is just going to try to challenge people's votes, block voter registration, prevent people from voting, and then try to overturn the result. That is a signal characteristic of an authoritarian political party.
All right.
And it's a minority party, and it's really operating like a cult of personality at this point. Mike Pence is the first vice president in more than 2 centuries to oppose his own president that he ran with. And in the last time, it was Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. And of course, we elected presidents and vice presidents separately before. It was just the runner-up who became the VP. So it's really the first time in American history where you've got a VP who's saying, the guy I served with is so dangerous, he shouldn't be in office. And that's what he said. Somebody who would elevate his own interests above the Constitution should not be president. That's what his own vice president said. And you have nearly a majority of Trump's cabinet also saying he's not fit for office.
All right, Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be with you, Kristen.
Really appreciate it. On this fourth and final night, well, we don't know the full lineup of speakers and performers on stage tonight, but we do know the programming will end with Vice President Harris accepting her nomination and a lot of balloons. Joining me now from the convention floor is my NBC News colleague, Jacob Soboroff. So, Jacob, you're out on the floor. Tell us what the vibe is. What's going on right now?
Oh, Kristen, it is a very, very upbeat vibe. Somebody just handed me a friendship bracelet. People are handing out challenge coins, trading pins. Not unlike the Republican convention, but it is an entirely different scene here. As you can imagine, I'm in the South Carolina delegation with a couple new friends, all legislators from South Carolina, correct? Tell me your name.
I'm State Representative John King. I represent the Rock Hill area of the South Carolina General Assembly.
And yourself?
Anna E. McDaniel, and I represent Fairfield County, Chester, and Richland counties.
Yeah, Dr. Ivory Thickpen, State Rep, Richland County, current Black Caucus Chair.
It's so great to be with you guys. And you were telling me you're a Morehouse grad, is that correct?
I am.
What is it like to be on the verge of having not only the first woman of color to potentially be the next president of the United States, but also an HBCU grad?
Well, you know, going to an HBCU, we are proud of every member of the HBCU community. Having the new president, who will be Kamala Harris, we are excited as a community of HBCU graduates to welcome her. But not only that, I'm a member of the Divine Nine. I'm an Omega. My colleagues are all members of the Divine Nine. It actually brings goosebumps to me. Like, I get so excited about what this moment means to not only the HBCUs, but the Divine Nine community.
You have those same goosebumps? We got to go, but I just want to know, but you got the goosebumps too?
Have the goosebumps, love, Kamala, love her, love her, love her. Let's go, let's fight, we'll win.
There we go, Kristen. Goosebumps all around. It's going to be an exciting night here tonight.
Here we go.
The stakes could not be higher, Jacob Soboroff, and you set the stage quite well. We will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. My colleague Hallie Jackson is with me on set in Chicago. She picks up special coverage on the final night of the Democratic National Convention. Night 4, Hallie.
This
Here we
is
are.
it, girl. Our last slide transition of the week here in Chicago.
It's been seamless.
I love it.
All these transitions. Maybe we'll bring them back to Washington.
Great show.
All right,
love it.
thank
We're going
you.
to talk to you more tonight because.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.